When he's not being interviewed by CNBC, he is a co-managing partner at ClayGate Advisors, and this is a place where he brokers deals with sports media conglomerates. He has worked for so many years doing great work in sports media at Fox and working with different soccer federations and beyond. We're going to tell his story. David Sternberg is with me on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio and Tennis Channel. David, thank you so much for doing this. This is going to be a look into your life, into your mentality, into your drive to learn about you from a kind of a panoramic perspective, get a full sense of who you are.
Great. Well, thank you for having me on, Bryan.
So starting out when you were in college, you went to Princeton for your undergrad, and then you got your MBA at UCLA. What has been the most stimulating course that you ever took in college, whether it was grad school or undergrad?
That's a great question. Probably my statistics and probability class, my first quarter at UCLA's Anderson School. I was a liberal arts major as an undergrad, studied comparative literature, didn't take a lot of math classes as an undergrad. And so that was an eye-opener in that I realized after taking that class how little I really understood about statistics and probability, and yet how important it is in pretty much everything that we do in business. Just if you don't have a crystal ball, and none of us does, the next best thing is being able to, come up with an educated estimate or guess as to what might happen, and statistics and probability gives you the tools to do that.
I feel like sparked there was this enjoyment in taking on challenges and seeing where you can test yourself in a way to better yourself. How much fulfillment do you get in taking on challenges and really craving that over the course of your life and how it's been seen?
I think all of us enjoy the gratification that comes with achieving something that takes effort and diligence and perseverance. And certainly I'd say, I've had a few experiences of that in my career. The biggest sort of decision that I had to make from a career standpoint was leaving a position I really liked, which was CEO of Universal Sports Network, and leaving the life that my family and I had built in Southern California 9 years ago to move to the UK to work for Manchester United, which frankly was a pretty significant shift, and one that I had a hard time making the decision to pursue, but I'm glad that I did. And in retrospect, it opened up a lot of new avenues and opportunities for me. So I think that's one small example of confronting a challenge, going for it, and seeing it through.
You mentioned perseverance. Where have you relied on that most in your life, and where it's helped you?
I'd say probably in the early stages of my career, wanting to be in the sports industry in some way, shape, or form, but not necessarily seeing the direct path in there. I went to business school after working for 3 years at the Oakland Coliseum in a very menial facilities marketing job. And getting to business school, at that time in the mid 90s, no sports leagues or teams or even media companies were really doing much MBA recruiting on campus. So, there wasn't an obvious internship, for example, that I could do or another pathway. So I got an internship in the movie studio at 20th Century Fox in the marketing team and learned that side of the content business. But I also took advantage of the 3 months that I was on the lot to meet the guys who at that time were just setting up the whole Fox Sports cable business. This is in 1995. So, those were the connections that I later wound up coming back to get a foot in the door.
So you were part of some sports media history where Fox is coming up and they're getting the NFL, and you're right around all of that and the bright minds that you were associated with. How much do you attribute your success and your vision and your mindset and strategy from being in rooms at Fox in those early days with like-minded go-getter sort of mindsets?
Yeah, no, the great thing about working at Fox in those early days was being exposed to people like David Hill, Ned Gorin, Bob Thompson, Jeff Shell, Rich Batista. I mean, these were people who like to, think up big ideas and implement them quickly. So there was just so much going on and so much that I could be a part of, even as a relatively junior executive, and just seeing how, much further ahead of the curve they were than anybody else in the sports media business at that time in the 1990s, setting up, the regional sports networks, building national cable sports channels. And then, of course, as you say, establishing Fox Sports with the NFL deal, and then MLB and NASCAR in quick succession after that.
How early, and we're joined by David Sternberg, I'm Bryan Fenley, do you trace that ambition that you knew would be necessary to navigate through this business?
Well, look, I mean, those people that I mentioned were all very ambitious themselves, and they fostered that kind of culture. And if you look at some of the people that I came in with in, that period, 1997, 98, a lot of us have gone on to do some pretty big things, not just in the media business, but in other fields. People like, Ryan O'Hara, Mike Lang, David Nathanson. It was a group that, was really very much, transaction driven, fast moving. We, I guess we're kind of, in a way, the Facebook of the 90s media landscape, in that we moved quickly and we did break a few things.
And in groundbreaking, to play off of what you said in breaking, and to think of where you've come since then and what you have developed. And I go into something that has to be sort of paramount to who you are, and it has to be so important to what you're doing now, and that is your ability to connect with people. What has been your secret in when you're trying to broker deals, that there's this trust that people have with you and your ability to really connect with those around you?
I think the ability to listen is an important piece of that. And it's something, frankly, I've had to learn over the last 25 to 30 years. I think, like a lot of other young people, bursting with energy and ideas, it's sometimes hard to keep your mouth shut and listen to what other people have to say. But I have sort of developed that skill for the last couple decades. And I think when somebody's feeling heard, they're more likely to want to work with you, right? And I guess one sort of corollary to that was definitely an asset during my years at Fox Sports International was, that I'm really into learning about other cultures. I studied a bunch of foreign languages in college, working in Latin America on the Fox Sports business there for many years. I was able to converse with people and even negotiate deals in Spanish. So I think that helped as well in terms of creating a little bit more openness and a deeper connection with people that I was doing business with. And that that just speaks to, a willingness to be open and curious and learn about other folks and not pretend like everything.
That curiosity, which has to be such an important part of the fabric of who you are and what's led you to do all that you've done. How do you find that knack for being curious, even extending beyond work and negotiating deals, and where it actually comes into play in other areas of your life?
Look, I think learning is a lifelong process. It doesn't end when you get your last degree. And, I try very hard to make space for that in my everyday life, whether it's, reading books or, following the news or, just exposing myself to things I don't know a lot about. Those are all things that I think, help make you into a more intelligent, but also more empathetic person, right? And one of the things I've been trying to learn a lot more about in the last year or so is what everybody's calling Web3 or blockchain, and understanding not just what the business models are, but what the value proposition for a consumer is. And just because I'm not into it and I don't own an NFT or I don't have a crypto account doesn't mean that there isn't something substantive there that has importance and value to others. So that's an example of one of the things that I've tried to read up on and get a lot smarter about.
Yeah, and that never ends. Through what have you found that you're learning most recently that has been very much helpful to what you're doing right now with ClayGate?
Well, one of the things that's become very apparent in the sports media world is that the content is just being consumed in a radically different way, particularly by younger audiences. You just don't have a lot of people under the age of 30, let's say, who are willing to sit down for 3.5, 4 hours to watch a live sports telecast from start to finish and take in all of the ad breaks and all the rest of that. So much of the real-time consumption is now happening on other platforms, whether it's Twitter or TikTok or Instagram stories or reels. These are the platforms that audience grew up with and is much more comfortable with, frankly, than trying to figure out what is a broadcast TV channel, what's a cable TV channel, where do I find FS1 or ESPN2 or any of that. So being able to share with our rights holder clients kind of that transition and make sure that they're putting not just highlights or behind the scenes content, but where they can live real-time event coverage on those platforms is a big part of what we're telling people.
If there was behind the scenes content into looking at how you are going about your day to day and trying to stay on top of things, and there's always that thought of wanting to think of something before somebody else, what does that look like for you?
Well, it'd be a pretty boring show because it would basically be me, with 7 or 8 windows open on my browser, reading a bunch of different articles or, following people that, I think have an interesting point of view on Twitter or reading blogs or Reddits or what have you. So it'd be a lot of me sitting here as I am right now with you, staring at screens and trying to absorb as much insight as possible. Obviously, the deal making side of it is what you would expect. A lot of phone calls now, more than certainly the last couple of years, some face-to-face meetings with broadcasters, with digital streaming platforms, as well as our rights holder clients.
it's got to be something that is almost all encompassing. How do you allow yourself in the throes of what you're doing, David, to step back for a moment and to allow yourself to see what you've done and to even, if possible, give yourself an opportunity to reflect?
I don't spend a lot of time thinking about things that I've done in the past. I'm a firm believer in kind of being in the moment and looking forward and trying to look around corners as much as possible. I mean, I take a lot of pride in what I've done, and I've been fortunate to work with some great people and had some great mentors who have shaped me and helped me get to where I am now. But I do take a lot of pride in being viewed as a knowledgeable and respected advisor and partner by our clients, and that to me is probably as much of a laurel as I'm willing to rest on it. Just knowing that I'm held in their esteem, and that they value what my partner Dan and I have to say, and that I'm in a position where fortunately most of the business development is word of mouth referrals and inbound, as opposed to having to go out and toot my own horn, which is not something I've ever really enjoyed doing anyway.
Well, through this process, and David Sternberg is with me on Bryan. Fenley, David, of course, sports marketing and media executive, co-managing partner at ClayGate Advisors. The idea that you have found your voice over these years, I know you're not one to rest on prior accomplishments. You're very humble and you're a team player. But do you, or would you ever allow yourself to see, or have you given yourself that time to see how you have found your voice and how that's sort of transformed over the years? And what does that look like for you and you finding your voice and your foothold and being, I know you're not one to take a lot of pride in yourself because it's not just about you, but to gain a validation in finding that voice and how that's taken you on a journey, if that makes sense. And the idea
No, it does, for sure. I made a very quick ascent in the ranks, so to speak, when I came to Fox Sports in 1998. Within, I think, 4 years, I was, an EVP after starting at sort of a director level. And I think if I do sit back from the distance of 20 years and reflect on it, I maybe didn't appreciate just how quick that was. A lot of it had to do with the culture of Fox at the time, and the fact that we were doing so many different things, and there was so much that had to be tackled, and we were a pretty lean organization. And people would get promoted and move on to other things, so that created upward opportunities. But I mean, I think it came really fast, and I was learning a lot kind of in real time. And I'm sure there are a lot of things that I could have done differently or better, but the nice thing about it is that I've had the opportunity, and I guess been given the rope to do a lot of really interesting things for most of my career. My dues paying period was pretty short, so that, I guess, is an advantage in the sense that even though I'm relatively young, I guess it's all relative, but that I still got a couple of decades of expertise to look back on.
If we were to go back to your first decade, before you got in the business, before you were in college, what would I have noticed your character traits that would have told me one day you would reach where you are today?
Probably a combination of curiosity and impatience. Uh, yeah. And impatience, which can be a positive as well as a negative, and it cuts both ways for me, just like a lot of other people. But it would probably be those two attributes more than anything.
What were you like growing up as far as if I was, what would I be seeing from you after school? What are you doing? Give me some insights into what was floating through David Sternberg's mind before you became what you became.
So like a lot of people in this business are a frustrated athlete. I played basketball and was the captain of the swimming team in high school. Kind of realized by senior year of high school that I wasn't good enough at either one to sort of take it to the next level. But always wanted to be around sports and the excitement and the passion that goes along with it. Being on a team and belonging to something bigger than yourself is always a real sort of value and attraction for me. So I think that was what you would have seen, in high school. Definitely very, academically driven too. And I was fortunate enough to, be able to go to a great university as an undergrad and get involved, in journalism. I worked on the student paper and became the sports editor. So that was kind of the first step, I guess, in the path that I've traveled.
If you were the sports editor at Princeton, when Princeton beat UCLA in basketball in 1996, what would the headline be? What would you want to include in that story that you noticed from that game?
Well, I think there were a lot of David beats Goliath type of
Yeah.
headlines after that game. The funny thing about it was that was my second year at the business school at UCLA. So I had a viewing party at my house and I invited probably 10 guys and gals from my MBA class. And then I had a few friends from Princeton who happened to be living in the LA area. And so we were all together, and one side of the room, which I happened to be sitting on because it was my undergrad school, was ecstatic. And then, the other side of the room was in total disbelief. But yeah, that was an amazing moment. It was 6 years after I graduated from Princeton, but I was still ecstatic that they were able to pull that one out.
My last question for you, David Sternberg is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. Coach Carrill, the teachings, the inspiration, the words, his coaching prowess, what mark has he, and obviously people remember him for what he did at Princeton, basketball coach, and he's done so much more in the NBA and beyond, but what part of him do you feel like you keep within yourself, the mark that he has on you to this day that you sort of live with?
Well, he had a very direct impact on me. It was my sophomore year, and I was the lead sort of beat writer for the men's basketball team. And I had written something towards the end of the season about how they were underachieving. They had, 4 seniors, I think, in the starting lineup, including John Thompson III, who later was the coach there and at Georgetown. And I guess Carrill didn't like it because they had a home game. They actually won the game, but it was against Penn. And he always was very agitated when they played Penn. And they had been up big and they almost gave the game away, and they kind of hung on at the last minute to win by 2, and went to his post-game press conference. It was basically him sitting on a chair in a hallway, smoking a cigar, surrounded by like 6 or 7 reporters. And before he started with anything, he pointed to me and said, you wrote an absolute piece of blank article. Get out of here. I'm not taking any questions from you. And that was, that was a pretty intense moment. But, to his credit, he found my phone number in my dorm, not the newspaper office, and called me the next day and said, hey, come on over to the
Wow.
And I went into the basketball office, and he said, you know what, I was out of line. I know you care a lot. You were just doing your job, whatever. But that was him. He was gruff. He was fiery. But also just a genius when it came to the sport of basketball. And I think a lot of what you see in the NBA today, the motion offenses, the focus on sort of getting the open shot, the passing game, the constant weaves, whether that's the Warriors or any of the other teams that play that way. I think a lot of it is traceable to him and the offense he developed.
What a fabulous story to wrap up this conversation. We started out this conversation when I asked you about, say, the hardest, most mentally stimulating course you had in college, and you mentioned something at UCLA. But then as we wrap up this conversation, I'm thinking about, well, I think another one would have been, and it's not necessarily in the classroom, but it's the course that you took in what you learned in the pseudo professor that is Coach Carrill, and that back and forth, and how cool it was to see him come full circle. And he saw a passion from you, you saw that from him, and that passion lives brightly inside of you to this day. David Sternberg, so fun, sports marketing and media executive, of course, co-managing partner at ClayGate Advisors, and they're doing so much great work. I'm Bryan Fenley. David, thanks so much, man, for sharing those neat stories with us.
Thank you, Bryan. It's been a pleasure.